Okay, gents, let's go over what I said I would do. I said I would be going over the Lucian proposed changes, which I believe before actually going into this, I haven't looked at all the changes yet, are to remove or hard hamper Lucian's early game capabilities as a solo laner, as it is incredibly impressive in both a solo queue environment, but most importantly, a professional play environment, where Lucian, and this actually applies to most solo lane marksmen, but Lucian is at the forefront of the argument, where Lucian not only is stronger in lane than you, starting at level 1, where he gets to put a point into PTA with his E plus his passive, or if he doesn't want to dash forward, he can still just start Q and outrange you in a good amount of matchups and gain control over the wave. Lucian actually is receiving some touch-ups to this problem, which has been in the game for what, like almost 2 years now, where Lucian's been a very prominent solo laner, to the mental sanity cost of everyone else in the game, because his ultimate's base damage at rank 1 is like 900 damage, and it's not very difficult to line up if someone commits to like using a dash first. So it's a fairly impressive pick, but we'll see here. I'm actually excited to see this because I'm so tired of playing against Lucian. I'll be honest. It's so disgusting. Hey everyone, I'm here to talk about some small Lucian update coming your way in 11.17. A quick TLDR of the changes. Solo lane Lucian early damage is slightly down. Lucian gains on hit damage when buffed by allies, including the move speed from W. R damage shifted to scale better to the crit, but starts at lower base damage. Okay, so these are all changes that are really good. IMO. I haven't looked, like, we'll see the exact numbers when they come out. Maybe they'd show like a couple goals of the numbers before they show the real numbers. But this is good because so the problem with solo lane marksmen is that they're better at you at level 1, but then they also outscale you like at item thresholds, right? Like a Lucian getting his Gale Force into Serilda's Grudge gets to kill you with almost no counterplay just because you're on his screen. But like you have to apologize for being on the same screen as him when his ulti's up. It's really unenjoyable to play versus. But also a lot of other marksmen. You have like, you know, Tristana mid, whenever Callista's playable in a solo lane. Even in like lower Mars, you have things like Vayne top that aren't as nearly as impressive because they're a lot easier to punish, especially because most like Vayne games are played like top lane, just by people looking to stop melee matchups versus inexperienced players. But it definitely does scale up depending on what character you play, the higher MMR you're playing, and how oppressive marksmen in solo lanes can be. Now that's not to say that they have absolutely no counterplay whatsoever, but it does create a situation where you do have strong, safe blind picks available to you in higher MMRs that are also flex picks, which is a whole nother video in of itself, is how large of a design problem allowing characters to play more than 2 roles is. I think 2 roles should really be the cap of where Riot allows champions to shift around into, and they should be very on it when a character shows that they're able to play more than 2 roles, because it ends up becoming such a large presence in pro play. But like I said, that's a whole topic for another video I can go into, and that could be a whole like 30-minute rant on its own. But yeah, with Lucian, these changes are more designed to push him towards bot lane, and I really like the direction they're doing. Now, this first change might be the one they pull back on a little bit, because in scaling down his early damage, you're taking away his identity potentially, because we don't know numbers yet obviously, but this makes me think that if he gets reworked a little bit too weak, then what's going to happen is he won't be able to actually be an avid lane bully, which was his main job back in the day when Lucian was a primary top tier marksman in bot lane. You would pair him with aggressive supports, he would have good trading patterns, he would have like a short enough dash cooldown to play really aggressive, had good burst, and was not a bad scaling into mid game pick, and then he would fall off like hard into the late game, but he would have a lot of self-sufficiency, you know, he'd be able to peel himself with a low dash cooldown, you know, there'd actually be, you know, ways to build an itemized lifesteal so you couldn't just get instantly one shot. AD carry used to have a lot more versatility in like build paths IMO, which is kind of ironic because of the whole marksman item rework, or the item rework that happened to every class. It was like marksman kind of got grouped into, you're either a Kraken user, a Gale Force user, or a shield bow user, and some of them can dip and dot in between, but generally you're only building one like 80% of the time, with some minor exceptions based on what characters you're playing against. So it kind of went against the whole, we want everyone to build everything and have a lot of diversity. But as per with items, it always turns into people are just going to build what's the best, and what is the best will dictate what characters are the best, because items have only gotten stronger over time. Which goes into my next point, where on this third change here, Riot is making Lucian's ulti scale based off of crit chance. A similar mechanic they've added to characters like Tristana, where it helps them be stronger on item power spikes, and it helps their mid to late game a lot more, and it allows them to take power away from their early game that then gets promised back to them the later the game goes. So I think this overall is a really nice change that doesn't really impact his solo lane or bot lane viability, but it pushes him more towards a less oppressive early game, which is the bigger problem of solo lane versus marksman bot lane Lucian, is that his solo laning is so oppressive and his bot laning is a little underwhelming. And then this is the change that is basically just shifting him into the Callista situation, where Callista has a lot of damage on her kit, but just one of her abilities straight up is tied to, two of her abilities is straight up tied to an ally character, which isn't unusable in a solo lane, but it definitely takes a lot of power away if you aren't paired with someone who is constantly able to play with you and able to abuse it. That being Callista's W passive on hit mark, where if either Callista or her ally that she's bound to hit an enemy minion or champion, or I think even like monster, right? They get marked, and then if the other one hits it, they take on that second hit a bunch of like max health % damage or something, right? Just something that makes it tied to a solo lane, because Callista's a very fringe case as well, where if she's too strong on her own, she becomes such a dominant solo laner. For example, her Q has some of the highest base damage ratio scaling in the game. So if you get to like level 5 in Callista, your Q's hitting for like 280 damage. That's why we saw a brief spike in Callista solo lane during, what was it, like super early this season or in like season 10? I forget the exact time, but Callista became an absolute monster like unnecessarily. So it's interesting to see them take this approach to Lucian by tying it to where you almost want and you're always incentivized to be paired with an enemy or to be paired with an ally when you're interacting with an enemy. But I don't think this ties him to bot lane as hard as like a Callista situation does, because if his early game damage is good enough, he'll still be really good in like mid lane like 2v2s or bot lane 3v3 situations or like river fights from a solo lane still. So it's kind of interesting to see. A lot of this will be very number reliant, right? If he just doesn't have the numbers to solo lane anymore so oppressively, then there will be a lot less of a reason to pick him, right? The main reason you're playing Lucian in a solo lane anyways is because he spikes so hard with items this season. Like items are so strong that the resources that solo laners get so out of control. It's the same reason why you see Graves get played mid right now, or why you saw Lee Sin get played mid. It's because if you're able to absorb a lot of resources and control pressure on the map, denying the enemy resources, you are a valuable pick in the current season, especially if you end up outscaling your opponent anyways, or scaling as hard as them for how strong your early game is. That's where the value of these picks come in. You fit roles really, really well. You cover all the bases except for like damage typing, which if you're picking Lucian mid or Lee Sin mid or Set mid, you should be picking like an AP jungler or an AP top laner, or even like something like a Ziggs bot lane, right? So now that I covered the direct changes a little bit lengthily, I want to go into like some of the ideology as to why, and I want to more importantly understand Riot's mindset in making these changes, because it's really important to understand what the company that is making all the changes to the game actually is thinking while they make these changes, because it gives you insight to either future changes or past changes, with obviously a certain amount of time frame. So Lucian's been quite weak in regular play for most of season 11 in all roles, bot, mid, and occasionally top. We don't mind a character when a character is flexible in a variety of roles as long as their counterplay is maintained, and actually it adds valuable depth to the character. However, problems started to appear when less played roles have much higher win rates than most played role, and we have to nerf a champion for being too strong in a place where most players aren't interested in playing them. One noteworthy version of this is when an alternate role dominates in pro play, leading to the main role being limited in regular play. I assume this is mainly what they are referring to when you're talking about Lucian mid versus Lucian bot, where Lucian received, I think, almost or maybe even literally no or next to nothing in terms of bot lane play, and was almost solely picked with the intention of putting him mid and then fringe counter matchup cases top. Like I don't know, he might beat Gangplank or something like that. I'm not trying to get Dom quoted out of context for a matchup I will tell you that I have not seen in a while, because it used to be a matchup you would pick with the intent of putting Lucian strong side, and then Gangplank never gets to play. Lucian falls into the latter despite mid lane having a lower win rate than bot lane, and most skill bans whenever Lucian is viable in solo queue, he quickly starts to dominate mid lane picks and bans in pro play. This means without a way to buff Lucian only in bot, his bot power in regular pro play is bound by his mid power. This makes a lot of sense. Now I will say that this is directly tied to just how certain play styles are more consistent the better the average player is. So Lucian is a very razor's edge character where you start the game with a lead, but if you ever lose that lead, you become such an easy target. So you have to play Lucian very, very well. You have to properly manage your wave, you have to properly take your trades, you cannot mess up all ins, you have to have good base timers, know when you're strong enough to fight, like you have to rotate properly, control vision, not die to ganks. All of these things that add up for like a challenger player, or even like a GM player, are a lot easier to understand because they already know a lot of these fundamentals from playing other characters. Whereas in lower MMR, where you see Joe Schmo Timmy Billy 36, who's like in gold 3, and he just watched his favorite LCS player play Lucian against Victor in LCS, and he goes, oh, I can can play Lucian, and then he plays Lucian against Talon and dies 6 times by 10 minutes, that's probably going to be a little bit of his cue because he's missing all of the fundamentals that go into playing a character that requires a baseline. Like, the skill floor is significantly higher for characters like that, especially in a solo lane, because if you're playing a character in bot lane, generally speaking, in like lower MMR, you're only really getting punished if you just like die on an all-in, because like higher tactics, you know, like freezing and properly setting up dives are a lot less prevalent. So you're not really being punished as hard in like bot lane, for example, if you don't know a lot of these fundamentals. Where mid lane or just solo lane in general, your lane can be dictated off like a single play a lot harder, and it's a lot harder to salvage that depending on the map state of all the other lanes. So we want to fully understand why pros value Lucian mid so much despite his weak performance in regular play. Asking our game analyst team of former analyst pros, high performing players, the answer boiled down to the following. Pros value early power better. Pros can intentionally draft mixed damage compositions for offset lack of an AP mid, and Lucian's ultimate is so powerful as a solo lane tool, there's more room to be aggressive and fewer people to body block. That is one, very true, because Lucian's ulti is, you know, similar to like a Sean ulti or Caitlyn ulti, which if you're in a solo lane doesn't have like the counterplay that playing Lucian in bot lane would have. For example, Lucian ulti in a bot lane 2v2 is going to do more spread damage than a Lucian ulti in a 1v1 mid. It's just by nature of how the ability works. I do think though, however, that this isn't like a completely accurate statement, because people aren't only picking Lucian because he has value in early power. Otherwise, people would be picking like Pantheon mid and using that level of early power, right? The value comes from he is so strong early game, and then if you play him well enough, he never falls off and is still extremely strong against the majority of team comps. He can side lane well, he can solo kill, he can skirmish, he can rotate, gain prio on waves. Like, you're waiting for his spikes before you take team fights. He fits all of the agendas that teams want, right? He only lacks magic damage, right? And like you said, with characters that were meta, you know, not so fucking far off, being like Diana being a prominent meta jungler, that's a pretty nasty synergy if you're able to just conveniently draft significant amounts of magic damage on your team and have your mid laner able to just abuse Lucian. So after understanding the core reason why Lucian is more powerful in coordinated play, we moved on to see how we could address some of these points and hitting his ultimate. Give power back to Lucian bot without Lucian mid and top dominating pro play. Exploration centered on the more obvious things between lanes, while Lucian always has a support. Yeah, that's another important thing as well. You know, that's just the dynamic of the roles. So it's not too much in depth to go there. After understanding, our first pass tried to gate Lucian's early power by increasing his mana cost. On the flip side, if Lucian was laning with an ally, he'd gain even more mana, letting him swim Q and E and run loose in a bot lane. There was even a wacky iteration of Lucian would restore mana to himself and an ally, leading to a hilarious test where supports like Turk Lulu would have unlimited mana and pump buffs into Lucian. However, there's a core problem here. Lucian isn't always with an ally all game. While bot lane has 2 people, there are many cases where Lucian wants to split push where he could actually win duels. And the independent core part of Lucian, goal 2 become, rather than make Lucian feel bad without being near an ally, make him feel even better with an ally. Okay, so I get the point of the change that we're trying to make, which is like, don't take something away from him, just incentivize him to have a different kind of play style. I like when Riot does this, but there are always exceptions where some characters have either too many options of ways to play the game, where they're good at team fighting, good at skirmishing, good early game, scale well, have strong objective control, like can clean up fights, can start fights. You know, you have to limit the amount of tools you give to certain characters, right? So it's very, very important that they limit, like keep conscious minds of limitations that characters are supposed to have, because no character should be able to do everything. Otherwise, why would you pick anything else? But I do think this iteration was pretty interesting, where they directly tried to tackle his mana. I do, however, think that wouldn't even be a surefire way to suppress Lucian in a solo lane, and it would have made him an even stronger, valuable flex pick, because the game has a really ridiculous amount of mana sustain in it right now. You can go Corrupting Potion with Biscuits, with Time Warp, and build a tier, and never run out of mana. And it's not even a bad investment to do all of those things. You see other mid laners do it quite literally all the time. You even see some top laners who have mana issues, if you're picking for like a counter matchup like Gragas, for example, also go tier. Or you saw like before when Ornn had a small bit of play, I think a couple of months ago, he would just tack on a tier just for the extra mana. All right, mana is not the hardest thing to come by these days. While I do think that was an interesting change, I definitely agree that it was not the right one to take in that direction. This brings up a critical third goal. Lucian is already incredibly fun. He's just a bit weak. It's not true. Lucian is not weak at all. We're not aiming to reinvent the wheel, just recreate complex rules and hooks that take take away from Lucian's core appeal. Sometimes simple is all that's needed. Keeping this in mind, we landed on granting Lucian bonus damage whenever buffed by an ally. This version creates a new avenue for supports to help Lucian bully in the early game. Before I read the rest of this, it's really weird because when they say, keep in mind this word here, where is it? Whenever buffed by an ally. So being buffed by an ally is different than being on the same screen as an ally. If you're playing with a Leona is not really buffing you. If you're playing with a Nautilus, you're not really getting buffed. If you're playing with an Alistar, like these are seen as the aggressive playmaking engaged supports, at least the majority of them. There are exceptions, of course, that have no actual interaction with your character. Maybe if buffed is a loose-ended term, like if you can use Font of Life, for example, and that counts as a buff, but that might not be seen as a buff. That just might be seen as a character interaction. So an example would be like, does Alistar's passive, the heal that goes off, the AoE heal, does that count as a buff, or does that just count as a heal? Like a buff could be like Taric W being put on you, or Rel binding to you, which gives you bonus armor. Does Locket count, right? Does Guardian count? Or is this very defined in like you have an effect on you that is actually giving you something versus you just got a one-time heal? What is buffed by means? It's an important thing to keep in mind. So you might see Lulu mainly paired with Lucian, and then they have like a crazy all-in potential at level 3 just because Lucian does an absurd amount of damage with picks on him. Or you might see Lulu Nami return or something crazy like that, where he's maybe better in lane with characters that should be more vulnerable in lane. But then Lucian can make up for their vulnerability with just pure offense. So it's an interesting thing to keep in mind, and I'd like to see how the changes actually get rolled out and see the possibility of the new pairings you can put with them bot lane. Also, there's more Lucian spell spamming, highly pattern. Some new power snowball lead in bot lane. Lucian can remain more relevant threat before he begins falling off during the end game. I'll be honest, I don't really think a whole lot of characters fall off anymore with the average strength of items. Obviously, there's characters like Rek'Sai and Pantheon, which hard fall off just because their kits are so absurdly strong early game that they cannot afford to have a late game. But like most characters are generally fine with overall scaling right now because the item power level is so absurdly high this season compared to previous ones. Lastly, there's Lucian's ultimate, an ability that scales heavily with levels, which come faster in solo lanes. The extra XP means Lucian gets his ult earlier than bot lane, so it impacts a larger portion of the lane phase, starting to kill at level 6. Opponent's pretty high health. It's also a big part of how solo lane Lucian can completely take over the lane. To solve this, we shifted one of the culling scalings, number of bullets, from experience based to item based. That's actually interesting that they would say just the amount of bullets, because that's a pretty that's one of the more important things, is how many shots you're actually getting to fire off, because it also increases the shot rate, if I'm not mistaken, because Lucian ulti goes off over a predetermined amount of time, but I might be wrong on that, which is more consistent between lanes. This way, bot Lucian doesn't have to wait till level 11 and 16 for his next spike. Also, watching the culling blast more bullets as you get them is pretty freaking cool. After a few more touches of the base stats and visual effects, Lucian should be in a position where he has a few more tools to make him feel better about heading into bot lane while sticking close to his independent gunslinger identity. I'm not gonna lie, I think this is pretty well written and it does a good job explaining their thought processes of why they're making these changes and what they expect the changes to do, and then even if these changes don't meet these goals, what their goals still are, and that they're able to pursue different alternative changes if these don't match, right? If these don't fit, if this is a square block and the Lucian fix is a circle hole and it's not going in, they can still afford to fix it. Now, one thing I would like to see is this is unrelated, this level of transparency with everything else, mainly like matchmaking, the rank ladder, autofill, everything like that. If this level of transparency was consistent, I would have a lot more praises to sing, rather than, I think the last time we heard about any real ladder changes was Riot said that they were going to add autofill parity, not parodies in like a Weird Al Yankovic song, parodies and like matching on both sides. So that was last brought up over a year and a half ago, I think almost 2 years ago now. So where is that? I'm genuinely tired of waiting 20 minutes of queue times to get 2 autofills versus 0 autofills, and then I sat through 4 dodge lobbies anyways. I don't think it's a good idea to nerf dodging when you should address why people dodge in the first place. But anyways, I digress. That also is another video in and of itself that could be like a 2-hour long video of just explaining why or how Riot could go about fixing a lot of the core issues that exist in current year League of Legends that aren't actually the game itself. And that's more than just client bad, because we know why the client's bad. It's built on very, very old technology. But anyways, yeah, that is, I think, it. Those are all my thoughts for the Lucian update. That's everything you need to know about what to expect from this update, and if there are any further changes, what direction they'll be led in. So yeah, I hope you guys found that valuable.